This was such a short, digestible Netflix show, documentary, just an hour and 34 minutes long. And it mainly centers around BTK's daughter's experience with him being caught, reflecting on her life with him, and how some of her experiences tie into actual cases that he was involved in. And if you haven't seen it, I'm going to get right into my thoughts. So go watch it, come back. But I I hadn't looked into BTK and all the specifics on that in a really long time. But growing up in the 90s, the unsolved mysteries generation, you had BTK and Dahmer and Ted Bundy and Charles Manson. And I did know a lot, but I feel like it had been a long time since I've heard about him. And this documentary had things that we know, but some things that we didn't know. Well, like I didn't know that how everything got started was simply because he lost a job. And he said, idle hands make for devil's work. And that is how he got started. I'd always heard, like, after he got caught in 2005. So I would have been 19, and I vaguely remember hearing about him being caught. And I think early 2000s is around the time when DNA started making a lot of advances, and he was caught by the police using his daughter's DNA, which we will get to a little bit later, and her thoughts on all of that. But I'd always heard that he was a good dad, which was shocking to people, because I think a lot of people would profile somebody who's a serial killer a lot of times not having a family. And if they did, you would think that they wouldn't have been such a great parent. But when I first heard about BTK, that was the consensus, was that he was a good dad. However, maybe not, because he was a good dad in some ways. Like, he would spend time with his kids. They would go on a lot of family vacations. The documentary had tons of photos of these vacations, but he was very controlling and had a temper if he did not get his way. And so you, of course, hear from his daughter in the documentary, and then her family friend, or the daughter's friend, who spent a lot of time. You hear from her as well. And by all accounts, while he was raising his kids, just mainly, even though he was a control freak, seemed like a normal family guy. And her daughter, throughout the documentary, throughout the documentary, talked about how it was really hard to separate her dad with BTK, and that she still loved him, but she loved her dad that she grew up with. And what struck me was, while I was watching the documentary and I was listening to the daughter speak, and this was my first time seeing her, hearing from her. I know that she's been active in the true crime community, and I've heard about that, but I've never actually heard anything about her life from her perspective. But watching her speak, I just feel like, just watching her mannerisms, she just seems, as you would be, so messed up from the situation. And she said that her family pretty much imploded after the arrest, and she didn't even speak publicly about it for 9 years. And to this day, she's the only person in the family that will talk about it. She's estranged from her mom, which is really sad. She didn't give a lot of other details. We know that the mom has said that she did not suspect anything about her husband, which is kind of wild. Although there was one part in the documentary where, when BTK was resurfacing and wanting some attention and sending letters to the media, that Dennis Rader and his wife were sitting watching the news, and they were talking about these letters, and she said to him, "BTK writes like you." And someone made a comment in the documentary that they think that if she had actually pushed it and really connected the dots, that they think that he probably would have like done away with her too. But he had 2 kids apparently. The son also, of course, has not been public, but he had a son and a daughter. At one point in the documentary, she goes back to the house where she grew up in, and it's since been torn down. But she goes on the property, there's nothing there anymore, but she's pointing out where tree houses used to be and gardens, and these are things that she did with her dad. And while she's there, she thinks that there's a woman taking pictures, and the person that she's with says that they're not taking pictures. And I'm thinking, like, she's so paranoid about how she's been received so negatively just by being the daughter of this infamous person. And I thought, oh, like she thinks people are watching her and they're not, you know. But then later on, a neighbor comes out yelling at her, telling her that, you know, basically she's bringing too much unwanted attention on the neighborhood, and that the people that are still there have to deal with all of this unwanted attention. And it's really sad because, you know, like I get you. I don't know. It's like I kind of understand not wanting or not loving having this really dark history in the neighborhood where you live, but it is what it is. And I don't know. I feel like she's so unfairly treated by the public. She's living her life. I mean, if somebody in your family turned out to be somebody like BTK, would you not have to go through a journey of like, oh my God, like reevaluating your life? And, you know, there's a process that you have to go through, and like, let this woman live, you know, like just coexist, have some sympathy. So he is one of these people, these serial killers who back in the day would send letters taunting the police, taunting the media, taunting the public. And we find out that he sent his first letter to the police after his daughter's first birthday. But then after that, things slowed down because he was busy with his kids. And so his next letter comes, I believe, 25 years after the first. It was in 2004, a year before he was caught. And he sent a letter to the police with a driver's license from an eighth victim that nobody had linked to him. And so at this time, it seems like, you know, after his first letter, things had slowed down because he was busy with his kids. Then he became an empty nester. And empty nesters have a lot more time on their hands, and they want to sometimes revisit their glory days. And so he really just wanted attention. He wanted publicity again. And there were a couple interviews with some of his like relatives of the victims or victims that got away. Like there was this one instance where he picked a house where it was I believe it was a single mother and 2 of her children lived, and he struck up a conversation with the boy on the street and wound up knocking on his door. And the boy was 5 at that time, and the boy opened the door and let him in. Side note, that's why, like, I have really high locks on my doors, and my kid, I'm always with her, so like this shouldn't happen. But my kid will never be allowed to open the door of my house. I don't care if we know family is coming, I will open the door. And it's really sad because this boy, years later when he's an adult, in the documentary he is interviewed, and he talks about how he blamed himself for basically letting him in. And it's like, obviously he's not to blame. He was a boy. These things shouldn't happen, you know, he's just opening the door. But I can understand all the confusing, sad feelings you would have after going through something like that. It's completely unimaginable. So back to the letters, he sent another letter with chapters, which I guess would be like the book of BTK. And then he threatened to have more victims. The letters became more frequent. And then it got to the point, this always makes me laugh. So he's playing games with the police, basically. And he asks police in this letter, he says, if I send a floppy disk, will you be able to identify me? Be honest. And it's like, police lie. And why, like, he's supposed to be this really smart guy who has done all these horrible things and hasn't been caught. But he asked the police to let him know, like, will I be caught if I do this? They want to catch you, sir. Like, it is just the craziest thing. And they're like, no, we can't. And they're able to find out that the floppy disk came from this church. And like some church, I think it was like a church library. And he's like a leader in his church. And they so easily caught this man. And it's like, it's so laughable. So they want to make sure, for sure, that this is him. So they know who he is. And so now this is DNA time. They need to get his DNA because they have DNA from crime scenes. And they know that he has kids. So apparently his daughter had a pap smear in college. And they go and they get the DNA. And it's a match. And the daughter said that she was upset that they had used it because the way that it was portrayed was that she got him caught. And she really, like, herself had nothing to do with him being caught. She didn't help the police catch him or anything. She actually really thought that they had the wrong guy. It took her a long time to really accept that her dad was BTK. But it was just her DNA that caught him. And, you know, you can't argue with DNA. It is what it is. And that's why so many people, you don't hear so much about serial killers anymore. And really, it's because of DNA. And so after that, she apparently, I didn't know about this, but Stephen King, you know, he's always got to keep writing them books so people keep making movies and TV shows and everything out of his characters. That man has got to be rolling in it. He has so many books. But he apparently wrote a book with a character based on her dad. And she was really upset about that. But she hadn't spoken about any of this in so long that this actually set in motion her speaking about. So it seems that after all this time of not speaking, and then the triggering event of Stephen King having a character based off of her dad, the floodgates opened, and she actually wound up writing her own book, which became a best-selling book. And she said that through that process, it was really healing for her. But of course, because people are garbage, she got threatening messages after releasing her book. And it's really sad that people can't separate what somebody does in a family from their other family members. Just because somebody does something horrible doesn't mean that anybody else in their family knew about it. It doesn't mean that they are the same. And it really just people on their keyboards discussing hurtful things that deeply affect real people, not a thought in how it's going to affect them, and no basis in what they're saying. But I really admire this woman because she talked about how she has a trauma therapist to deal with her reality of her dad being BTK. And then I'm sure that they also help her through any of the negativity that she, gets that's undeserved from people. And she could easily, she didn't speak for 9 years on it, but she could easily crumble and fall apart and have really unhealthy coping mechanisms. But she has a therapist. She's written a best-selling book. She's helping police with these cases, with details. they're giving her dates, and they're going through the files with the dates that these attacks happened, and she's connecting it with her own life. And so there's footage of when he's caught. You know, they present him basically with everything, and they're like, dude, you're caught, you're done. And when he knows he's caught, he literally just very calmly admits to everything. When they search his house, they find a kill kit, they find trophies. Like literally, it's almost all laid out for them. And the way they show photos of everything that they found, and going back to the wife, it's like, it's kind of wild. I mean, I'm a wife, and I'm thinking, if my husband was a serial killer and he had all these trophies and kill kits in the house, would I know? And it's like, you think you would, but like my husband has an office and I don't ever go in there. Like he could have stuff in there I wouldn't know about. He could. Not to give him any ideas. You know, like that's scary to think about, but I don't go through his stuff in his office. So even though it seemed to be everywhere in their house, it is possible that she didn't know. And it seems that people believe that she didn't know. Although the police are saying that she was heavy in denial. She could not believe that there was any possibility that he was BTK. So back to the daughter and her connecting the cases to her life with her dad. The car that she drove, that her dad gave her, she later on found out there had been a dead body that had been transported in that. It's like, it's a happy, exciting thing to get your first car, you know, if you're lucky enough that your parents can give you your first car. And then later on you find out that like this lady that he killed was in there. And there was another case where they had a victim where there were these pine needles and they couldn't figure out where these pine needles came from. And it turns out, you know, because his daughter had been playing outside and pine needles had gotten in his car and the body had been transported in there. And so the needles had been on his daughter and that had been in his car and that had gotten on the bodies of his victims. And she's just in her mind being like, I was outside playing. This is our family car. Later on, it's my car. And then my dad has this double life. And she's just like mind blown. And, you know, I talked about him basically being an empty nester and having way too much time on his hands. The neighbors, when he was caught, they were shocked, but also they did say that he got weirder after his kids grew up. But nobody could have suspected that he would have been guilty of this and would have been the BTK. And so after he was caught, the family got together. They said they got some KFC and they all just sat around and ate. And the daughter said that, oh my gosh, I forgot what the daughter's name is. I'm calling her his daughter, and I completely failed to write down what her name is. My apologies, because I really, really like her. But they said that it was really like a funeral. It was like his funeral when they got together to eat their KFC, because he basically is dead to them now. He's going to be in jail the rest of their life, and so they have to mourn him while he's still alive. So at this point in the documentary, Dennis Rader's in jail, and his daughter's pastor told her that it would be helpful for her if she wrote him letters. And so she does, and he writes back. And she said she was really, really careful about what she said to him because she knew by growing up with him that he has this temper. So she really didn't want to have him shut down. And so she was very careful. And this was before the trial. So at the trial, he very calmly and clinically, like I said before, goes into detail of the killings. And his family did not go to trial. It was so hard for them to hear all of the details that started coming out, and they wanted to give the families of the victims the time in the trial, to have it focus on them. And his daughter was saying that she just really disassociated from the facts, but Rader kept such detailed recordings, and they were all put out in trial, and even pictures of him dressed up in bondage and in the victim's clothing. Can you imagine? Can you imagine seeing your dad dressed up in bondage and the people's clothing that he killed? Like, oh, the horror. Then comes the part that I think was the most shocking of all, which is where she found notes that he kept where it is possible that he abused her, and she blocked it out, doesn't remember somehow, because he said, let me see if I can remember what it was. I forget exactly what it was, but it was like bondage, and that, like, he kept like a diary almost. He wrote like bondage or something. I don't know if that's the correct word. And then like next to it, like his daughter's bath. And she was like, oh my God, what does this mean? Like, did he do something to me? And I don't remember, because she does say that she had night terrors as a kid, and she had nightmares about a bad man in her house. And, you know, drawing connection to, he broke into people's houses. Like, this is what he did to people. And so I'm getting chills. He could have been the bad man, and these could be repressed. Oh my God, like literally full body chills. She could have repressed memories. Like, he could be the bad man in the house. And so the police get her to go visit him in jail. And this is the first time she's telling us about the first time that she has seen him in years. She goes to visit him in jail, and she's not supposed to ask him about the notes regarding her. She's supposed to just see if she can find out if there's been more victims. And so she says that when she sees him, he's really frail, but he's happy to see her. And however, he does not want to talk about any of the crimes with her. He wants to reminisce about their life. Again, he wants to separate the two. He wants to talk about their life and not his double life. And then she gets really angry, and she asks him, she's like, what does this note mean? And he says that it was a fantasy. First of all, that right there would have been enough. Like, you had a fantasy about this, first of all. I mean, the fact that like he could have done it is another thing and completely horrible. But actually having a fantasy about it and admitting to it, absolutely not. He says that he never touched the family, even though he had a fantasy about it. So she melts down, as you would, and because she's human, you know? And so ever since that visit, she doesn't see her dad anymore. She's, as I said, a victim's advocate, very active in the true crime community. And she says that most days she doesn't even think about him anymore, which honestly, you know, is amazing for her. She has her therapist. She helps others. She has a best-selling book. She is living her life. She has children of her own that she's raising. I think that she's doing as well as she can be, and she has my admiration. That's the biggest thing that I took away from this documentary, is how strong she is. I don't think I could be as strong as she is. I couldn't do what she does. I really couldn't. I think I would become very reclusive. And she was, you know, for the first 9 years. But what she's done since then is so admirable. So that's pretty much it. As I said, it was a very short, sweet documentary, under 2 hours. So I would say very, very worth the watch. Netflix is kind of pumping out the true crime stuff. They did the Ed Gein, which I haven't seen. And I've heard mixed things. I've heard it's not so great. I've also heard that Ed Gein is a thirst trap now with the dude that portrayed him. And then I just saw that they are doing a Eileen Wuornos, am I saying that right? Eileen Wuornos documentary that's coming out at the end of this month. So that will be exciting for me to watch. And It's coming out the day before Halloween. Perfect watch. So I will watch that.
Nice.
Probably do a video and probably do a video on that. And I think that'll be it for this one. So I will see you very, very soon. Really quick, I do want to pop in and say Dennis Rader's daughter's name is Carrie Rawson. I feel regretful that throughout the whole video I kept saying BTK's daughter, his daughter. I know a big point of contention in the true crime community is giving more notoriety to the bad person, the bad man, the serial killer versus the victims and even his family, which in ways are also victims. So I feel bad about that. I'm gonna post the video as is, but ahead of time I should have double checked her name and said Carrie instead of just saying his daughter. So sorry about that, about anybody that might be offended by that. I meant no offense. As I said, I think that she's awesome. And so yes, Carrie Rawson.
Get out.